Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marta Kliptovska, and I'm the Programs and Communications Manager at ASHB, the Association for Smarter Homes and Buildings. For those who may be new to ASHB, we are a non-for-profit international industry association that's been promoting advanced technologies in homes and buildings since 1988. Today's think tank is focused on the Smart Home Data Compact, navigating privacy, consumer trust, and value creation, a topic that continues to evolve as connected technologies and changing consumer expectations redefine the modern smart home. This session is being recorded, and we'll share both the recording and the presentation slides with everyone who registered and those here today. You're welcome to participate however you'd like, whether that means joining the discussion or simply listening in. These think tanks are meant to be interactive, so we encourage your questions, comments, and real-world experiences throughout. Feel free to unmute yourself at any point to join the discussion. With that, I'll pass it over to Daniel Intolubbe-Chmil from Harbor Research, who will be moderating today's conversation. Dan, apologies again for butchering your name. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Marta, and appreciate the intro and context. And everyone, this is Daniel Intolubbe-Chmil from Harbor Research, Director of Research here, and have worked closely with Marta and the ASHB team over the last handful of years. So I'm excited to walk through this presentation and engage the participants around the topic of the Smart Home Data Compact. Before we dive in, just wanted to give a little bit of context for Harbor Research. We're a strategy, research, and consulting firm centered at the intersection of emerging technologies and disruptive business models. We work with a wide range of client types, from large technology suppliers, OEMs, to ventures and startups. Pretty much cover the entire scope of the economy in terms of domains, verticals. So kind of sit at an interesting perspective to kind of bridge a combination of technology strategies, disruptive business models, and continually evolving kind of customer and user dynamics and preferences. So a lot of our work with ASHB has obviously been focused on the smart home, but we also do a lot of work on the smart building side of things as well. Again, the topic today around the Smart Data Compact is really meant to start and drive a dialogue and conversation with the participants around data privacy, trust, and innovation, and we'll frame up a combination of some of the work that we've done over the last couple of years focused on data privacy, but also want to really drive the conversation around what can the ecosystem do to engage users, partners, regulators, et cetera, to effectively form or implement the best practices associated with a smart home data compact. And so that really it translates to a framework for stakeholder collaboration focused on privacy, trust, data value, shared principles for responsible data governance. And again, I think combination of innovation strategy, technology development strategy, ecosystem strategy, and obviously engaging users in different ways. So in terms of some goals for this session, we'll want to kind of just align on industry privacy principles and identify insights, build consumer trust, and sort of the dynamics around the privacy paradox and how suppliers can really manage that paradox in the context of engaging consumers and users, the balance of privacy and innovation business models, and then developing solutions for better consumer experiences. So with that, I can just go ahead and dive right in. Wanted to kind of start off with a framework to really outline the sort of key stakeholders for smart home data governance. I think obviously the considerations across all these different parties and pillars of this smart home data compact imply a set of best practices, collaborative mechanisms, and obviously the combination of solution development and delivery to ultimately create user-centric solutions and services that leverage combinatorial technologies across the ecosystem, while also engaging regulators and sort of outside of the smart home utilities and service providers and those kind of stakeholders to create more holistic experience that balances innovation with consumer protection and trust building. And so, each of these pillars and sort of themes as part of this framework play a critical role in ultimately establishing secure, data privacy-driven solutions, policies, best practices to not only better serve consumers and address key pain points around security and privacy, but also, increase the value of what suppliers in the ecosystem are offering. And actually, before we continue, do want to say we do have a couple polling questions scattered throughout the deck. For those that are related and coming from a smart home ecosystem standpoint, we'd love to hear feedback. If you're sort of outside of that, or it's not totally relatable to your organization or role, feel free to skip. But we do just want to have that context. And obviously, as Marta said, interrupt if you do have questions or inputs. All right. So obviously, a huge part of the data privacy security dynamic is where does the kind of user sit, and understanding the user dynamics around different types of data across the smart home. And so understanding the reality of this privacy paradox where users, consumers voice concerns, but still share certain types of data and are open to sharing different types of data in different capacities. That obviously requires a little bit more precision in terms of aligning different operational objectives of how to use different types of data and where consumers really sit in terms of their varying concerns around that type of data. And so in developing a more holistic data sharing strategy, that data type is critical for really understanding where the user sits. So it could be usage patterns, voice commands for virtual assistants, energy consumption, location data, personal preferences around automation, just as a few examples. And obviously, a lot of these data types, they fall along a spectrum of personal to more removed or asset-centric. What we found kind of year over year is a general trend towards outcome-driven sort of data sharing preferences. So and the visibility, transparency around that. So the consumer really preferring the transparency around how the data is being used, and if they can really see that line of sight towards the actual outcome that data is sort of feeding. And so that outcome-driven kind of element is a big part of aligning to those consumer needs. But extending to more of the drivers of what really creates a holistic and sound data sharing strategy. Data storage and sharing frequency is obviously a huge part of that, and understanding and integrating into either portfolio capabilities, consumer, collateral marketing content to establish that visibility. A combination of local and cloud storage obviously has an implication for the level of risk associated with data as it's being generated, processed, stored, et cetera. And then obviously the frequency of that, whether it is real time or periodic. And then, as I mentioned, the sort of benefit gained and that outcome that this different types of data are really driving towards are another area of considerations and sort of key things to keep in mind as you establish best practices, strategies around data sharing across your user base and consumer base. And so when we really think about then, what does that consumer trust profile look like relative to company types and different data types? And this is all information derived from a year-over-year annual survey that we do with smart home users. But the most trusted company types are electric, water utilities, telecom, and security solutions. I think from a electric and water utilities and telecom perspective, obviously, this is probably the most familiar company type in a lot of ways to a lot of smart home users and non-users. but obviously we pay utility bills every month, we pay our cable bill every month. And so that engagement mechanism obviously reinforces maybe some of that trust versus some of these more application use case or device specific vendors that you see in the moderate to least trusted, with property management being among those. But security solution providers, obviously, in line with the instilled trust in consumers. When we look at data types, and this has been a pretty consistent trend year over year as well, but electric and water usage definitely as the top one, I think, particularly as it relates to outcome-driven sort of practices and portfolio strategies. Reducing electric, water bills and that utility cost is something that really motivates users, and obviously is something where if they were incentivized to share that data for that cost reduction, is a clear kind of trend that we've seen in the market. Appliance usage falls under a similar kind of scope relative to what's really driving that trust to share that kind of data, but also includes more sort of preventative maintenance or optimization around that appliance, and how that appliance can continue to operate and run more efficiently. And then home environment is really, as we've seen in our survey, really tied to definitely more personalization and automation in the home, but obviously a huge motivator for establishing comfort in the smart home as a key priority for a lot of consumers and users. And so obviously this establishes some context for where customers are today, but in terms of some of the least trusted or most concerning data company types or data types, I think what this also indicates is just a sort of call to action for the ecosystem to really engage consumers around, what are those concerns around these different data types, or why are you distrustful of certain company types? So we can ultimately bridge that disparity between what can be very useful data for both consumers and users, or consumers and suppliers, to be shared and ultimately improve consumer experience. Also provide transparency around that, how that data is being used. So maybe that concern becomes less of, a black box of concern and more of here's some explicit ways that we're using surveillance video or voice command data. And so a huge element of addressing, what the paradox is really getting at, and then this sort of spectrum of trust and concern, I think, is also around transparency and engagement with the consumer to a certain extent.
Daniel, we have a question here from David Kaufman. Where do the big ecosystems, Apple, Amazon, Google, Samsung, sit on this slide?
Yeah, so I think it would be a combination of smart device suppliers and then obviously some social media and streaming, particularly from the perspective of smart home users, non-users. Obviously, the Googles of the world, kind of overlap with cloud services, but from a sort of perception perspective, I think the social media and streaming and smart device suppliers is really where that would fall. And so for someone like Samsung, obviously appliance usage data, a big area as well, versus Alexa, Google, Apple, more on the voice command surveillance, kind of side of things in terms of data types. But yeah, that's kind of where I would plot some of those large ecosystem and hub vendors there. Okay. All right. And so again, sort of calling attention kind of back to where we see this spectrum of trust and concern around certain company types, around different data types. What you also kind of start to see with the sort of evolution of the consumer within a data life cycle and around a given use case is that these highly attractive use cases for users often do imply what might be considered or might be reported as more concerning data sharing sort of platforms and sort of data traffic around more concerning data types. And so For instance, integrated lighting control, combining smart home device performance, personal preferences, and behavioral data, home layout, and voice command, all within that middle to low tier of concerning data types for the user, yet highly attractive and high demand from users. Smart lock integration, kind of the same thing. And so, again, I think what this speaks to is more of if you ask the consumer, on a sort of isolated kind of basis, there would be higher concerns for some of these data types. But when you contextualize it in the use case and the outcomes, that really starts to drive more trust. And maybe that's just around the visibility of the data types, but also they can actually see the value, the benefit that they're gaining from sharing these different types of data. Again, I think part of this compact is really bridging that divide between these consumer concerns and the application of the different types of data for suppliers. And I think that brings us to our first polling question, which is what most influences customers to share their data with smart home suppliers. First one is a clear explanation of benefits they'll receive. So this, again, aligns to more of those conveying more outcome-driven benefits and value based on data sharing policies. Second, transparent privacy policies and controls. So actually consumer sort of demanding or indicating they want to see that. Trust in your brand reputation. So consumers just driven to share just based on their perception of the brand of the supplier. Competitive pressure, so really more influenced by the broader ecosystem and competitors in that ecosystem. Regulatory requirements or incentives, and then we obviously provide another open response where applicable. All right, let's look at here. So if we look at from the top reported, trust in your brand reputation is we got 7 out of 11 votes here. And so, sort of interesting driver there. And maybe if there is anyone that wants to kind of speak to, exactly maybe some effective ways that they've differentiated their brand and they have a more reputable brand related to that, that would be great. But then quickly, just the next top one is clear explanation of benefits they'll receive. So obviously, maybe more tied to that outcome driven dynamic there. And then the next one down is transparent privacy policies and controls. So those were the top reported there. And I'll pause here to see if anyone who answered trust in your brand reputation maybe wants to speak to maybe some of the best practices around establishing that sort of reputable brand recognition. And then we can get feedback on some of the other responses as well. Right. Well, with that, that's okay. I appreciate the inputs and the engagement there. And we can obviously summarize some of this and share some of the results to the participants moving forward. Great. All right. Well, let's continue on. Let's see. There we go. So moving into some other kind of dynamics around this, framework of the Smart Data Compact. I want to get into interoperability and standards. Obviously, that is a huge element of, ensuring secure data exchange and interaction and orchestration, and also, a big part of this sort of platform-oriented privacy and security strategies as well. Obviously, the Matter protocol has been a huge, central topic for the smart home ecosystem, and I know it's been a variable development path in terms of where people really see that going as a truly universal standard. But overall, the big indicator of progress around establishing that universal connectivity standard, setting that baseline for enhanced privacy and security, and ultimately, providing that platform and that initiative for greater industry alignment. And so I know that there are, a combination of different things that the ecosystem can really engage and to really drive interoperability and standard. But relative to the Matter protocol, we did want to ask the participants what is the current status regarding Matter interoperability at your organization. So Marta, I'll let you open up that poll. And as she's doing that, we just have a range of sort of adoption levels here. So fully adopted certified products in the market, in development testing phase, evaluating, planning to adopt, or not pursuing, either using proprietary standards or otherwise, and then waiting to see what the market does, market adoption first. Just want to gauge, the audience around where they sit relative to Matter adoption, and if there are inputs around other interoperability strategies, initiatives, or if there is anyone in the audience that wants to maybe speak out against the Matter protocol as this core organizing mechanism moving forward. Just give a few seconds for everyone to answer there. All right. Majority of people really are in the evaluating, planning, or below, so not pursuing or waiting to see market adoption first. We do have some other open responses that I can't quite see, Marta. I'm not sure if you have any.
No, unfortunately, because it's a multiple choice. If anyone wants to speak up, they certainly can as to what the other responses would be. But unfortunately, we don't have the option for that.
Yeah. So obviously it'd be great to hear from people on that front from other open response. But obviously healthy skepticism in the audience, which is good, and I think we're seeing a lot of that in the research we do. Does anybody have any feedback based on their answer or any of the other open responses? The general sentiment from the audience, I think, is something that we've actually seen in a lot of our research as well. I think there's a lot of skepticism around the Matter as this sort of universal standard to organize around. Obviously, this is a very difficult topic that implies a combination of technology development and ecosystem collaboration, along with regulatory sort of compliance and oversight there. It would be good if towards the end of the presentation, if people do have inputs around how they're engaging this whole interoperability issue, and if it's more driven by ecosystem development and partner engagement, or if it's something that people don't see as necessarily a priority right now until the smart home maybe becomes more mature, users become more mature, where we have greater sort of digital footprint in the smart home. But appreciate the feedback there. Great. All right. So moving on. Obviously, this interoperability and this topic hits on sort of a platform or technical side of things as part of the compact framework. Just wanted to kind of highlight, obviously, privacy regulations are a huge influencer and driver of development, and sometimes almost a barrier to maintain compliance, I guess, from some perspectives. But obviously, we've since 2018 in GDPR enforcement to the Cyber Trust Mark Initiative, seeing obviously a maturation of privacy regulations and policies where ecosystems can unify around best practices. Obviously, in some instances, I'm sure that as I mentioned, this can be as much of a barrier as it can be an opportunity to continue to push the ecosystem and evolve the ecosystem and the portfolio of technologies to deliver more privacy-centric solutions and services. But obviously, the engagement with regulators is a huge aspect of what the supplier ecosystem can do to continue to ensure data privacy and security around personal data for smart home, and is a necessary sort of a consideration and dynamic to have as part of the Smart Data Compact framework and strategy roadmap. But beyond that, want to kind of get into the ways in which suppliers are driven to use different types of data, and really understanding the implications of collecting customer and user data in the context of the life cycle of a product, all the way from design, development, manufacturing, and selling the product to operating and maintaining the product once it's deployed. And so I think, in terms of how consumers kind of perceive data usage, I think a lot of, consumers, and I think this is, largely driven by almost the social media effect, where a lot of data is assumed to be used for things like advertising and sales, configuring the user and customer engagement to, influence purchasing behaviors and drive that sort of selling point for the user. But obviously, as manufacturers and vendors can attest, that data can go a lot further when you understand the implications across the life cycle of the product, whether it's using performance usage data to inform product improvement in the design and development phase, understanding customer feedback derived from ongoing support, maintenance, failure data, again, to iterate and improve those products, solutions, services. And then obviously in more of the interaction of middle of life manufacturing data, sales data to, again, kind of inform and feedback into what can vendors do to improve the value of the product. But the sort of focus of, from a consumer standpoint of, where the data is being used versus where, the ecosystem and suppliers are really driving a lot of this data collection and usage strategies back into their life cycle. It, just reflects the range of primary business drivers for collecting customer data. And this leads us to the next polling question, which is about those primary drivers and why, if from the audience perspective, why their organizations collect consumer data and what that is then used for. And so this could be product improvement and R&D, personalized customer experience, predictive maintenance and support, new revenue streams for business models, or required for basic functionality of the actual solution or service. And we have the other open response that people can speak to. But again, just really trying to understand from the audience, what is that primary business driver for collecting consumer data? Great, awesome. All right. So in terms of results, top reported was personalized customer experiences. And great to see that. And we've actually, as part of some of the more recent ASHB research, we've looked at a lot of the interaction of AI personalization in enhancing smart home solutions and products. So that is very much so in line with what we've seen in more recent research and analysis around that. Product improvement in R&D is the second most reported, with predictive maintenance and support as the third, that is also tied with required for basic functionality. So obviously a good representation, across applications and, for organizations and leveraging different types of data for different ways. I'll open it up to see if anybody has any feedback. I think, again, a lot of what has been reported is what we have seen in a lot of the recent research. Great. So another element of the sort of a technical strategy that we wanted to highlight is the sort of shift around the sort of infrastructure elements of data security and data privacy. Obviously, and you kind of think about, or I've thought about this in terms of almost integrating or instilling some enterprise IT best practices for cybersecurity, where when we look at the broader economy and other more mission critical segments, obviously on-prem local is very critical for that security. And as smart homes become more connected, as consumers and users become more informed about what's collecting data and how it's being collected and all this, it sort of is, it's starting to point towards almost overlaying some of these enterprise IT best practices into the actual smart home architecture. And I think that's a huge area where obviously ecosystem collaboration is required to ensure that devices can communicate at the edge with different local processing, storage, compute, et cetera, infrastructure. But then how that data is then being either anonymized, is being secured and then sent to some sort of remote environment. And so a combination of sort of enhanced residential infrastructure around Wi-Fi, storage, et cetera, processing, et cetera, but then also emerging sort of more software-driven applications, AI integrated applications that might even leverage some sort of even blockchain-enabled exchange to ensure that security and anonymity around once that data leaves the premises, what does that look like, and how are suppliers really managing that data from a remote storage standpoint, as well as interaction with any sort of brokerage services that might then overlay value-added applications and more AI-oriented applications on top of that data. So just wanted to call that out as an interesting dynamic, and we've worked with beyond just the smart home space. We've worked with a handful of ICT vendors that really are starting to see the injection and the sort of need for high performance infrastructure for more what have been maybe traditionally thought of as more consumer oriented applications, smart home being one of those. So also interesting to hear from some of our other clients outside of just strictly smart home that they're starting to see that pull for more of that high performance infrastructure, just around really honestly driving or decreasing those cybersecurity risks, but driving more privacy centric infrastructure deployments. Great. And so another key technology aspect that we wanted to dig into is really this value-based data exchange and sort of the role of different types of data exchanges and models associated with data sharing that really are aimed at driving mutual benefits through ethical smart home data sharing. And so, I think inherent in a data exchange, there must be some sort of as this kind of calls out, bidirectional benefit and incentive for both consumers and suppliers. For consumers, this might be gaining personalization, improved energy efficiency, ensuring that they're they have the best innovation for their lifestyle, whatever that might be. Ultimately highlighting that sharing this data and some sort of configured bidirectional model allows for better experiences, better services solutions for them. And obviously for suppliers, combination of valuable insights, new revenue streams, and continued differentiation. This is sort of small effort for the ecosystem to really organize, but I think understanding the various models and how these different models kind of interact with different pillars of sort of value props and benefits, challenges, pain points for consumers and suppliers. It's helpful just to see the whole landscape. So we wanted to outline a few different models around data exchanges, the data marketplace being the first, which is a more transparent exchange platforms that's sort of shared tradable nature of data ownership. Privacy control is variable negotiable based on who's contributing and leveraging the marketplace, and oftentimes is more multi-party commercial. And an example of this is selling energy usage data, so more of the data brokerage model there. Personal data store is a little bit more geared towards the user, where they can kind of dictate and understand how their data is being collected, stored, and then ultimately used. We've talked about this in the context of different ways and maybe some more emerging disruptive ways to actually engage consumers, almost opening up visibility into the data lifecycle. particularly in the context of AI and how AI is leveraging different types of data. I think the growing concern of invasiveness with AI for consumers is not only it's contributing to the overall concern of sharing data, but I think it is also driving more engagement into the sort of technical life cycle of this data, and I think that really speaks to, again, some of that transparency around that. And the last is federated learning, some more privacy-preserving analytics on a decentralized architecture. And obviously, this is a huge area of more disruptive innovation. It does, obviously imply a pretty significant, technology development and solution development roadmap. But inherent in that federated learning architecture is security, is flexibility, scalability, and can benefit the sort of both parties from a customer supplier benefit, and being able to facilitate that exchange with a higher integrity and higher dynamic of trust. So core to this, it's a solution kind of landscape of the future of data privacy security. I think implies some sort of value-based data exchange as that sort of platform pillar between consumers, suppliers, and other third-party regulators and service providers. So next is really just highlighting some business barriers around privacy innovation. So as we think about continuing to invest in either product development, reaching consumers in different ways, ecosystem collaboration, we think about these kind of four core areas, core challenges. And this definitely is a sort of reflects a lot of the data we've collected from our recent research over the past few years for the smart home. But obviously, regulatory complexity is a dynamic that continues to introduce challenges for suppliers and may oftentimes slow adoption and innovation. Integration challenges and getting really back to interoperability challenges and sort of the walled garden ecosystems that are emerging that really limit the extent to which data can travel to and from different ecosystems, education gaps between suppliers and consumers, and then cost barriers just that restrict investment and scalability of privacy solutions. And so another poll question, but that really want to just gauge what is the biggest barrier to achieving better data privacy in smart homes? Is it around this regulatory complexity, consumer education, technical limitations, cost, business model dependency on data, lack of industry coordination, or something else? Righty. Let's see here. All right. So top reported response is lack of industry coordination. Obviously, very difficult to get everybody on the same path and sort of strategic roadmap around data privacy. But then tied as across three different responses: business model dependency on data, consumer education awareness gap, regulatory complexity or inconsistency as the second reported responses there. Very helpful context there. I think obviously lack of industry coordination, is something that, honestly, the strategy and intent of some of these kind of activities like this think tank are kind of aimed at sort of starting the dialogue, driving the dialogue, and obviously a core sort of a pillar of why, industry associations like ASHB exist. But would love to hear if there are any maybe specifics around what is sort of driving this lack of industry coordination, or if there are other kind of variables that are influencing that lack of coordination from the audience, or if there are any other points of feedback. Wonderful. All right. Moving on to supplier differentiation and best practices, really just wanted to kind of summarize up some of the things that we've talked about relative to how we see some of these industry best practices sort of coming together, sort of these key themes of strategic privacy measures. Obviously privacy by design, sort of inherently baking in privacy as part of the architecture, whether this is additional hardware configuration around local data management, ingestion, and structuring of the data, so it's more anonymous, or it could be a combination of things like local data storage or different security certifications that ensure the way that data is being collected and then sent somewhere is in a secure, privacy preserving strategy. Transparent user controls. Again, this kind of goes back to almost opening up the sort of the black box of how data is collected and leveraged, and doing so through more intuitive interfaces, dashboards for the user. Obviously, we hit on local data storage as part of the more portfolio architecture and deployment architecture of these solutions. Security certifications. I think both from a sort of organizational supplier standpoint, just to ensure that you are, aligning to the best, the best in class kind of certified practices, and the certifications that really drive your solutions to be secure. But obviously interacts with building consumer confidence and kind of goes back to that brand recognition around having security and privacy as a top priority. And then obviously there's that competitive advantage that I think will be increasingly important as again users consumers kind of evolve, become more mature, understand the different mechanisms and ways data is being collected, but we'll really look to who are the responsible suppliers out there, and as sort of an influencing variable and factor for brand loyalty and purchasing different solutions or services. I think positioning data stewardship at the sort of forefront of a brand and capabilities of a portfolio are going to be increasingly important moving forward. All right, and so we do have just the final set of polling questions here, and this is a double one here. So it would be great if we could get some feedback around the privacy security features that the audience is prioritizing relative to the sort of priorities of investment around their portfolio. And this can include things like local on-device processing capabilities, enhanced user privacy dashboards controls, third-party security certifications, privacy-preserving AI technologies, and transparent data marketplace sharing options. And the second is which cross-stakeholder collaborations would most benefit the industry today. And so I think the last poll question around that indicated a lack of industry coordination, I think would be an interesting to look at where, in that context, where you think that collaboration would benefit stakeholders today. Would it be manufacturers, platform owners around standardization, driving interoperability, suppliers, utilities, really driving value-based programs? So again, thinking back to energy usage data and who are those trusted companies? How can suppliers really inject themselves into that trusted network? Industry plus policymakers, so more focusing on a regulatory and compliance standpoint there. Companies and consumer groups, so more engaging that consumer, that user more directly, and then or an integrated approach, which is all of the above or a combination of the above, and then obviously any sort of other or open response feedback would be very helpful. Great. All right. So the initial question, which privacy security feature would you prioritize investing in next? Top reported response is enhanced user privacy dashboards controls. which is great to see, you know, in a lot of the more in-depth interactions we've had with ASHB steering committee members in the last couple of years. That has been a huge point of dialogue in driving sort of these best practices. So would be very interested to hear if anybody is willing to understand what that actually looks like. You know, we've talked about more intuitive user interfaces, dashboards, you know, whether that's a mobile app or something that's, you know, a part of a smart home hub or something like that. It'd be great to understand what that actually looks like from a different solution or service perspective. But the next reported are a combination that's tied between local on-device processing capabilities and privacy-preserving AI technologies. You know, those, you know, I think a lot of times go hand in hand. Obviously, edge AI is kind of the key and sort of frontier technology strategy that really enhances performance and obviously contributes to a lot of the security and privacy best practices we are reviewing today. But yeah, again, would love to hear some feedback there. But any feedback or additional inputs from the audience on the first question? Great. All right. And then the next, which cross-stakeholder collaboration would most benefit the industry? Somewhat as expected, integrated approach, all of the above, is the top reported. I think that's, you know, somewhat necessary, you know, to actually achieve, you know, everything that we've talked about today. I think that's also kind of inherent in the framework we proposed. Obviously, you know, with you know, a lack of industry coordination in mind and understanding that this certainly isn't a problem that's being solved overnight, would be interesting to hear if anybody does have feedback on, you know, what might be, you know, that first priority of industry collaboration, or what that roadmap might even look like. Does it, you know, first need to start with manufacturers and platform owners to establish just here's how we're technically approaching this problem? Then does it go to things like industry and policymakers to then reinforce and make sure that those technology solutions are aligned to regulatory requirements? And then lastly, then shift to something like suppliers and utilities, where they can then inject this sort of industry coordinated, privacy first, security first set of solutions and regulations into something that resonates more with consumers. Yeah, any feedback on that would be appreciated and helpful. All right, great. All right, so the last slide here is just kind of looking at you know, some next steps in terms of empowering a privacy-first smart home future. In terms of some immediate actions, you know, we think about things like conducting comprehensive audits on current data practices, understanding where they kind of stand, how they stand up to privacy by design principles. Enhancing transparency in data collection and processing policies, implement clear, informed.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Is there a question?
Are you there?
Hello? Oh, I think that was just a mistake. Implement clear, informed consent mechanisms. So kind of also interacting with that data collection, processing policies, and then evaluating things like the Matter protocol for seamless device integration or alternatives. I think all of these sort of speak to establishing sort of a pulse on your organization, a pulse on the market relative to where it sits against these sort of privacy by design principles, and then aligning to some of the ways that you can engage consumers more effectively, and then ultimately sort of start to drive that specification influence back into your product lifecycle from design to operating and maintaining it. Medium and long-term strategies outline some additional granularity, you know, expanding upon data collection and processing policies by, you know, establishing those robust user dashboards for data control, industry recognized security and privacy certifications. So again, extending your brand into these sort of established security and privacy compliance and certification bodies. Actually piloting some interoperability and security standards driven benefits there. And and exploring models for value-based data exchange. So introducing that next layer of that transparency, that user engagement through different data marketplaces, but also extending that to the broader ecosystem as a sort of evolutionary step towards more open, interactive exchanges. And then long-term goals focusing more on establishing privacy as a core brand differentiator, competitive advantage. Again, I think a lot of those immediate medium-term strategies and actions kind of stack up to how to position a brand to maintain that competitive differentiation in the future as this becomes a sort of centralizing driver of a lot of consumer behavior. Proactively engage regulatory bodies, obviously, as part of that ecosystem collaboration, whether that has introduced more of a barrier to your organization or you frame it more as an opportunity, it is a necessity. Obviously, invest in research and development for privacy-enhancing technologies like federated learning with a little bit more of a longer sort of roadmap towards actual commercialization. And then setting the tone for the smart home ecosystem to draw upon ethical data stewardship and consumer trust as a sort of organizing strategic pillar for solution development and delivery moving forward. And so I think just a couple of considerations to kind of sum up everything that we've talked about today. Be interested to obviously hear any feedback on how people kind of perceive these roadmap considerations. If there's anything here that maybe is too much of a pie in the sky kind of blue sky scenario kind of perception, or if there are things that are particularly perceived as maybe significant barriers from moving from some of these more progressive steps between immediate, medium term, and long term. But yeah, any thoughts or feedback there are welcome. But with that, I will just kind of open it up to any broader set of questions, reactions around the presentation today, or any of the polling questions. So yeah, open it up to the audience, or Marta, if you have any other inputs or questions, happy to address those now.
No, this was great. Thank you so much, Dan. And yeah, if anybody, I believe David, you have your hand up if you want to ask a question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm happy that this is recorded because, of course, in the middle of your webinar, I get a business call. But I'll share what it is. So is the smart home, and we are having a presentation at one of our events, a DC home of the future? And literally the people who just called me, they are doing solar cooling and selling, the solar, the batteries, so that we make our smart home also much more efficient. And maybe that's where the security issues are. Is somebody going to get into my inverter meter and get my credit card, right? So how does all these digitalization things, and you may have covered it in your slides, and I will get them. How do we overcome that? Because people do want to, save money and be green and still have a smart home.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because and sort of another topic that we focused on in this year's research was actually around sustainability and sustainability-driven outcomes, and what users are prioritizing. And sustainability and saving on energy costs, utilities cost is at the top usually, always. But when we actually asked consumers about their willingness to share data, if these outcomes were guaranteed, skyrocketed that willingness to share data across both users and non-users. And so it's just, as you mentioned, people want this, but they, like you also said, they want it to be secure. They want to ensure that isn't creating vulnerabilities. I think this comes down to more of the ecosystem collaboration from a technical development standpoint, ensuring that there are, in the actual device and hardware, there are those security protocols integrated, whether that is something as more advanced as a federated learning sort of deployment and a network of, exchange and secure transactions of data in that context, whether it is a combination of, local storage that allows you to anonymize the data so you can't pinpoint it to any one user. I think that becomes, much more of a technical sort of roadmap and architectural kind of pursuit than anything else. You comply with the regulations, you can do all this, but does your technology, does your solution and the ecosystem of solutions stack up to, what is the scope of cyber threats out there? And so,
Yeah, no,
yeah, and
no,
I
no,
think,
I'll just, I agree with you. And I will just share that, we have the green button. Actually, the whole province of Ontario and many of the US states are doing this. It came out from the US initially. The green button lets people have their real meter data in real time, literally.
right,
And,
right,
and that hopefully we have time of use rates here,
right,
and people can say, oh, I'm going to charge my EV at 2.5 cents at night, but they have to realize they're going to pay 22 cents during the day.
right, yep,
So, I think if we give people data, I think we're overwhelmed in some cases with the amount of information we have. We have to figure out which is the right information, and then
sure, yeah,
what's secure and what's true in light of AI and those challenges. Anyway,
yep,
thanks very much.
great, yeah, awesome. Thanks for the contribution. Any other questions, thoughts? Great, awesome. Well, really appreciate everybody's time and engagement on the poll questions. Hope this was helpful. And Marta, I believe we'll circulate all the slides, and we can also maybe summarize some of the polling questions so people have some of that feedback.
That's right.
But
Yep.
yeah, Marta, any other final conclusion thoughts, feedback, inputs?
None for me. Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate you doing this for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. And please feel free to also follow up with questions offline if they arise. Happy to address. But yeah, appreciate the time and yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care.